And we are back. The NSE has just closed. Huge trade happened over the last 30 minutes. Initially, the market was at 143 million. It's now closed at 260 million shillings. An extra 3 million was traded in Safaricom, which ticked up about 53%, half a percentage point, and closed the day at 28.3. Still seeing some demand there. But don't go away. We're going back into our discussion on OTT with Eugene. Eugene, just before we took a break, we're looking at taxation. How do you look at taxation with regards to OTT in the Kenyan context?
Well, it's incredibly complex because you're dealing with a lot of companies who are not entirely Kenyan, and you're dealing with the internet, which is global. So oftentimes you'll have a company that's domiciled in one country, whose servers are located in another country, but then is selling services in Kenya. And how do you tax that? And where in that particular pipeline do you tax that is a complicated question, which is why up until now, Treasury has been content to tax data. Because at the end, everybody's using data to access these services. So if you want to capture that activity.
So just capture it through data. But then you also mentioned the element of the digital platform tax. So is that clear, or do we just need to wait for guidance from Treasury on how that will be implemented?
That needs guidance. And the danger there in terms of the economy and jobs and the like is that there are a lot more people who are using OTT platforms as business enablers or as the primary platform for their business. So whether it's people who advertise their clothes on Instagram or have gone and created their own website to sell their own content and their own services and products, the internet has been an incredible, powerful enabler of SMEs. And it's how this tax is implemented may actually impact that. Okay,
so something certainly worth looking out for. George?
You're a political economist. Let's talk economy. I'm just finishing reading Diana Cole's. She has a very small book, a very short book on GDP. And she's laying a very strong case that GDP is an indicator, which is a very old statistical metric. So it's a very old economic statistics.
Yes.
It goes back to Great Depression, 1930s, post-World War II. GDP, originally, the way it was designed, it used to count physical goods, mass production of physical goods. We're in an era where the economy is becoming increasingly weightless, very weightless. I could hail a ride, from here to Pangani or Mudithi Road. Essentially, look at the kind of service we're talking about. People streaming movies, streaming news. I stream news, stream Blueberries, all these other platforms. I don't buy physical TV. I don't buy physical decoder. I don't buy physical satellite. The economy is becoming increasingly weightless. How do national account statisticians account for OTT platforms into the GDP? Are they being reflected in GDP today?
Well, similar to the data, the tax issue, is that it's GDP is really about where you capture the value and how you capture that. So it's, and that is in many ways captured by people are buying more and more data. And so that is reflected in GDP statistics. And then those people who earn income from their online businesses and the like, that gets captured at some point along the value chain. So yes, it does get captured, but it's much hazier.
It's a puzzle for the statisticians. How do you capture the fact that Kodak is no longer producing physical cameras and people are taking cameras on their phones? That's a big dent on the GDP, because if Japanese GDP was counting number of cameras, does it mean that the economic GDP as a statistic going downward is becoming irrelevant?
Well,
do you think that in Kenya today that GDP is understating the extent of service economy?
Possibly, but that's more to do with the informal economy and people who pay cash for services that isn't captured than it is to do with OTT services. And when it comes to GDP, it's really a matter of just remembering to take it as one of many indicators of economic health. So it's not the be-all and end-all, it's not the gospel, but if you look at it among a set of other economic indicators, then you get a pretty good picture of the health of the economy.
But if you look at it standalone, you probably get a wrong picture.
If you look at it standalone, it's probably a bit of a skewed picture.
Fine. And the next question for me is, you talked about taxation. And the puzzle is, how do you tax a company that's operating in Kenya but is domiciled in Ireland, for instance? Facebook, domiciled in Ireland, Uber domiciled in the Netherlands, but operating in Kenya. I mean, how do you I think it's a puzzle for them. I'm also be curious to see how the government actually rolls out a taxation plan for online services. Do you consider betting as OTT? Betting platforms?
Possibly, it could, but that's an interesting one, because usually that falls in a different class of services that are taxed and regulated differently. When it comes to the taxation question, it's interesting that you mentioned it, because it's not just Kenya struggling with this conversation. It's a lot of other countries who are doing so. I would
imagine.
And there's actually an OECD effort to look at the global regime surrounding taxation of technology and international financial flows. And it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that and what's adopted from that, because there are a lot of countries who think they're losing a lot of tax revenue
to such platforms.
To such platforms.
Yeah, think about how do you tax Uber? I mean, Uber drivers. It's all
the value is gotten from, and I mean, speaking of
it's all happening in the cloud, you know.
So look at Jumia. It's registered in Germany, but the bulk of its revenue proposition is in Africa. Then it lists in New York. So yet you're a consumer, but you're not able to get direct access to tap into this investment opportunity. Outside of Jumia, what other opportunities do you see for building businesses or for people to invest in if you're looking at the OTT today?
Well, there's a lot, and you know, Metropole is one of those. You know, it's that these new, whether it's digital TV or online, so on platforms such as YouTube, has allowed a new channel and new content to come online. And
I hope you watch us.
Well, I wouldn't be here if I didn't. And
that's good news.
That's what we're happy we have watched.
And you're seeing a lot more of those sorts of things.
Okay.
So that, as I said earlier, it's an incredibly powerful platform for SMEs. It's, you know, you're getting digital lenders, many of whom are Kenyan themselves. You're getting, you know, platforms like Viusasa, who are Kenyan and putting out Kenyan content and African content. So I think you're seeing local businesses trying to do what Jumia does in terms of delivering goods and services. You're seeing courier services, all of them riding on top of telecoms and data pipelines. So yes, there's a lot of potential there, and you're starting to see some of it, both local and international.
But then that in a way says that the way we've been doing marketing or our PR from the way we've been doing it maybe 5-10 years ago certainly has to change. So for instance, let's go back to Metropole. So you're out there and you've already found a way of distributing your content. Then how do you think about it when I'm thinking about
high
OTT?
quality content.
How do I think about getting people to be able to get onto me? Because I know on one way it's very easy if I'm a blogger, I just go and just say whatever I want to say, and it doesn't have to make sense. But the quality and what people want to see vis-a-vis what people need to be seeing, there's always that, how do I address it? If I'm using OTT, then how do I think about marketing? How do I think about appropriating value for the content and services that I'm availing to the market?
Well, as with all, it's about finding the right channels and messaging to get to the audiences that you want to speak to.
Okay.
So, you know, and how you go about doing that is different, whether you're a blogger or you're a big complicated channel like Metropole. So it's different for everyone.
All right, interesting. Different and evolving.
Just remember something about regulation. I remember that a couple of months ago, I think it's probably a year ago, the Capital Markets Authority said, issued a public caveat that you should only deal with, when it comes to online forex trading, you should only deal with licensed licensed entities. And the license regime is very rigorous. I found that to be a bit tough, because how do you crack down on me trading on a platform or elsewhere? You know, I think they should have just issued an advisory saying the risk of capital loss is very high. But at the same time, they're not guaranteeing you that even if they license someone, then they will minimize the risk of. But my question is, it's pretty tough. You must have heard about that. It's pretty tough when trying to bring prudential regulations to online platforms, which are so many of them out there. You think that you could easily regulate prudential platforms prudentially, like those for online forex trading? You must have come across some of those platforms.
Yeah, well, it's impossible to regulate all of them to the extent that you'd like. But I think what CMA was aiming to do was to say to the market, here are the guys we've licensed and we regulate, and you can have a certain amount of trust in that their systems and functions actually do what they're supposed to do. Whereas if you use any online platform,
The too predatory, could be predatory.
What could happen,
Yeah.
you know, is and there's no recourse as well, right? So if something goes wrong at your regulated and licensed forex trader, I can make a complaint to CMA
Yeah.
or CBK or even go to court. Whereas if it's an online platform, it might disappear tomorrow with
In
my
thin
money.
air.
And
The
so,
clouds.
so I think that's what CMA was aiming to do.
Yeah.
And I think increasingly you'll see a bit more of that as regulators realize we cannot regulate everything as we used to do when everything was physically based. But what we can do is help consumers distinguish between trustworthy platforms or websites and those which are not. And I think you'll see a lot more.
You talk about recourse. Do you think recourse is a strong value proposition for regulation? I mean, should you just trust a regulator because they've said there's a recourse? I mean, you have banks who failed in this market.
And you're left with 100,000.
And you're left with the hunter. Is a recourse a really value proposition for regulation? I mean, that's a question for another day, but I just don't think recourse is a
No, it can't
it's a
be the
value
way to go.
proposition
It
for
cannot
regulation.
be the way to go, no.
Yeah, but again, the most important point is that trust. You know, we've licensed these guys. They've gone through a very rigorous and painful licensing process, taking months, or if not years sometimes. And then you can trust them. So it's trust. They're trying to build a trust, an element of trust in this. Yeah. Have you seen people lose money online?
Well,
Or had to?
Well, definitely heard of.
Yeah,
So yeah.
Yeah, like I was talking to a friend of mine who has an online demo of a platform, and I think the initial capital was about $10,000, and they were at minus. They'd lost about $7,000 after 1 week. You know, so I don't try that. That's for someone else. Don't try it. If you want to trade forex, wake up at 2 a.m. in Kenyan time to follow what's happening in Hong Kong, because Hong Kong is 7 hours ahead of us. And a lot of things happening there, and by the time you wake up, 30% of your capital is up. So, in the benefit of, there's no hindsight in this, but in the benefit of foresight, you think regulation is good?
Some, yes, as I said earlier, there has to be a balance. And interestingly enough, because it's a global phenomenon, you regulators here have the ability to take a step back and see what's happening in other jurisdictions and see what's working and what isn't, and maybe learn from that. So, you know, I think the Communications Authority is taking a measured approach to this in terms of they're not barging in with regulation of OTT services. They're looking to hire a consultant, get the views of industry, see what's going on globally in the space before they come out with something. So I think that's possibly the approach to take.
But I just want to ask you one last question. Is there a strong case for central banks pursuing cryptocurrency?
Yeah, possibly. In terms of, you know, crypto, as I said, currency is about trust. And
in God we trust.
In
what's the term of the dollar?
Right, in payment systems. And to this, even if you're on a cryptocurrency, you still value it in terms of currencies printed and regulated by central banks. So earlier you said Bitcoin is worth $11,000. You still talk about it in terms of dollars. It's not a standalone yet. So in that sense, the central banks
even if you go, I think they used to have Bitcoin auto machines, cash machines, and they used to dispense dollars.
Exactly.
It's still a dollar. You still back to the dollar. It's all about the dollar.
As long as it's still connected to traditional currencies, there'll be a role for central banks to play.
Okay. Sorry, but what's your parting shot? I mean, do you think that OTTs in the next 5 years are going to run the show?
I think we're in for a very interesting time in terms of OTTs, in terms of what the regulatory. I think over the next 3 to 5 years, the regulatory landscape will be formed in large part. The tax landscape will be formed in large part, and some of this disruption that we've started to see over the next few years will fully start to play out in terms of, you know, there's a lot of big decisions that, you know, pay TV providers, traditional taxi operators, even traditional bus operators, you're starting to see high capacity vehicles.
I've seen swivel.
So
little, I don't know what they're calling it. It's swivel and little car in this space. And if there's a sector that is ripe for disruption in our economy now, it's public transport
sector.
So it's you've seen the disruption online, you've seen the disruption in terms of entertainment, which is continuing, and you'll see more of it. And over the next 3 to 5 years, not only will you see more disruption, but you'll see the regulatory landscape start to take more defined shape. So it's going to be a very interesting and important time.
Yeah, I think I was...
Actually, just before we move from the whole element of transport, I keep thinking, so today we're all getting Huduma numbers. Huduma is working with MasterCard. Is that something that we're missing there? Is that an opportunity? Because at some point then, everything is going to be interconnected, Internet of Things, right? Then there's M-Pesa. Is there a potential opportunity for the usability of M-Pesa to jump from where it is? Or is there a different way of looking at it?
Well, we mentioned it earlier. Safaricom has made an attempt in terms of the cards and the watches and the tap.
Yeah,
and I wouldn't be surprised if they made another attempt at some point.
So.
Or you saw people like Equity trying to utilize, their Equitel platform to try and do something
Facebook,
around the transaction space and Libra.
Wow.
So yeah, I think there's more to come.
There's more to come.
Yeah.
And I think what I'm hearing all of us saying is, at least for us, we're in a space where we have the basic infrastructure at a national level, and we also have buy-in from the at least the core regulators. So CBK, CA, Ministry of ICT, they're sort of in a way trying to get us to move ahead and to leapfrog. Because if we actually get it right, there's an opportunity for our economy to leapfrog from where we're at, maybe quadruple in less than 10 years. Do you think that could potentially happen from all this innovation, OTT, Internet of Things, whatever is happening?
Yeah, it could be a massive part of our economy. So even if you just look at the IT sector as a whole, if you go back 20 years, it didn't exist.
Exactly.
And then when we did finally land the sea cables, the fiber cables, this sector exploded out of nowhere, and now it employs hundreds of thousands of Kenyans and creates trillions of
we even have to restart our GDP to take into account.
So NSC, 50% of the value on the NSC is Safaricom.
Yeah.
So in effect, what you're saying, without Safaricom, there would not be, there'd be nothing happening on the NSC.
And when you look at the value of companies like Apple or Microsoft, all we need is one of our own to break through, and it could be game changing.
One last question, Eugene, from me is security concern from OTT platforms. How much of a concern have you seen, the security?
Well, it is a concern around data and privacy in terms of, and there's multiple elements to that in terms of who can see what you're doing on these platforms. So does government know what I'm watching on Netflix?
Does your parents know what you're watching?
But the question is, what will they do with that information?
What will they do with that information?
What about the data protection bill?
The data protection bill is, well, there are two of them. There's one in the Senate and there's one in the National Assembly.
Okay.
And it'll be interesting to see how Parliament reconciles the two. And then interesting to see how companies adjust. So, you had the GPDR in Europe last year. Still a lot of adjusting going on in terms of how companies are trying to put that in place. But on top of that, there's a lot more awareness around data privacy.
Yeah, I think Facebook because it's one of the biggest culprits. In terms of data privacy. They've really taken much of the flack in terms of lacks in data privacy.
Yeah.
Would you be concerned with Libra, with that concern? Have you seen an extension of that concern into
Yes, so there has been
Libra,
an extension of that concern in terms of who would have access to that data. Would it be connected to your Facebook profile? And there's questions around that, which is what regulators are asking in terms of, so the basic fundamental concept may make sense, but how will this thing actually work? And how will it integrate or not integrate with other systems, particularly Facebook systems? And how will that data translate from one to the other? That's because, for instance, if you compare your credit card, and that's data at your bank, and there's very strict rules about what your bank can do with that data, to data about online purchases, that's very...
They will sell it to marketing companies.
That's very different.
So your purchases are here, but your taxes
this is
here.
What it buys on Friday evenings.
But then this is the amount of tax that you're remitting. It really doesn't make sense. Gentlemen, it's always such a pleasure to have this conversation. We hope you can come back.
Thank you
but
for
before we
having me.
finish, anytime, before we finish, OTT, give us a parting shot. What do we think about OTT when you look at Kenya today?
An increasingly large part of our economy and society.
Oh, wow. Upside, a lot of upside. I always say Safaricom when I hear such statements. George, do you agree? Safaricom, yes or no?
Yeah, I largely agree. But I also want to say that final parting shot, that my assessment, I think that the contribution of services, especially the emergent OTT over-the-top platforms, is being underestimated in the contribution. Continually being
in the
underestimated in the GDP.
Wow. Yeah. All right. There you have it. So OTT can present a massive opportunity for this economy. As always, I say Safaricom is certainly ahead of the curve in terms of tapping into what's happening in that space. All right, so we're coming to the end of our show today. Join us again tomorrow at 9 to find out what's happening in the markets, and look out for the listing of derivatives tomorrow. Official launch happens on the 11th, soft launch happens tomorrow. Thank you and good evening.